Good morning. I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, which is historically a humanist congregation. And this is a humanist perspective on theological questions that we call coffee and wisdom. I've been talking for the last couple of weeks about beatitude, mysticism, saintliness, and that kind of thing. I've been calling it beatitude and beat attitude. And this week, I'll be looking at the beats and the zeitgeist. This is the actual group in U.S. culture called the beats. Now, just a little review here. A mystical experience, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is an experience granting acquaintance of realities or states of affairs that are of a kind not accessible through usual means. That would be the senses, the consciousness, in a more rational way. Well, what was beat to the beats is a good question. And according to one of them, Jack Kerouac, the root, the soul of the beatific. So the beats were the root and the soul of the beatific. Capital B there. Well, what's that? Well, Wikipedia tells us in Christian theology, the Beatific Vision is the ultimate direct self-communication of God to the individual person. A person possessing the Beatific Vision reaches, as a member of redeemed humanity in the communion of saints, perfect salvation in its entirety, i.e., heaven. And nowadays, of course, we would add nirvana. So you get the idea, the idea of mysticism and beatitude or beatific vision are very close to each other in the ways that they were thought of within Christian theology. And Jack Kerouac grew up a Roman Catholic, so he was very imbued with these ideas from Roman Catholic mysticism. Wiki tells us that the central elements of beat culture are the rejection of standard narrative values that has to do with how they wrote, making a spiritual quest, and that's why we're looking at them on Coffee and Wisdom, the exploration of American and Eastern religions. This becomes very important within the movement. The rejection of economic materialism, explicit portrayals of the human condition, that would be very down to earth and gritty. Experimentation with psychedelic drugs, and I guess I would add all kinds of mood-altering drugs as well, and sexual liberation and exploration. Yes, the beat became the beatnik in popular culture, very much a cliche. We see a magazine cover that says an uncensored, unexpurgated expose of the beat generation. It's shocking, it's shuddering, sensational from Paris to San Francisco. The beat. They revel, they rebel, they revolt, and they renounce, according to these cliches. But of course, cliches often do encapsulate something about the actual thing. And yes, if you look back through the literature of the time, you're going to see a lot of black berets. You're going to see a lot of black clothing. You're going to see Chuck Taylors, even at that time, and those black and white striped tops that were at that time very much identified with French culture. Well, yes, it was a literary and artistic movement after the Second World War, which gave rise to many elements of subsequent countercultural movements here in the United States. Now, one of the things that we think of when we think about the post-World War II moment was the man in the gray flannel suit. That was later made into a movie. It was a best-selling novel of the time. And an ad we see for the man in the gray flannel suit with Gregory Peck. It says on there, the original madman. And of course, that is where the idea of madmen came from. So, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit by Sloan Wilson. However, Sloan Wilson actually was a World War II vet, and he was speaking to the people who had gone through the war experience. In one scene in the book and the movie, the star, the protagonist, whose name is Tom Rath, R-A-T-H, but Rath, is sitting on a commuter train in a gray flannel suit. But what is he thinking about? Well, this is from the novel. Tom, that is the protagonist, had knelt beside the sentry. This is a German soldier that he is killing. He had not thought it would be difficult, but the tendons of the boy's neck had proved tough, and suddenly the sentry had started to sit up. In a rage, Tom had plunged the knife repeatedly into his throat, ramming it home with all his strength until he had almost severed the head from the body. Now, that's not what we think of as what the man in the gray flannel suit might be thinking about, but the actual people in the gray flannel of the day were indeed very much affected by the Second World War, as were most people in the United States. So nowadays we would call this PTSD, but very much it is part of the time period that we are talking about. For example, we know the Hells Angels nowadays. It was a motorcycle gang. How did that get started? Well, the original Hells Angels was the 303rd Bombardment Group from the Second World War. It was a group. And one of the central things about the Hells Angels as they formed after the Second World War was having one of those trophy German helmets to wear as you rode your motorcycle. Again, vets coming back and adjusting or not to American culture of the time. But not everybody was ready to put on a gray flannel suit. A classic man in a gray flannel suit was one of the Beats, William S. Burroughs, 1914 to 1997. He always wore a three-piece suit and looked very dapper. He was also a heroin addict, and one of his first books was called Junkie, that was very much about the nitty-gritty of kicking junk and getting right back on it, and the cycle going on and on and on. And this is how William Burroughs made his debut in the American consciousness. Norman Mailer, another Second World War vet and writer of the time, said of Burroughs, the only American writer who may be conceivably possessed by genius. Most famously, he wrote a book called Naked Lunch, which was an experimental novel, much discussed, but not all that much read. But it was again, nitty gritty and very sensational, and sold a lot of copies, even if not a lot of people were prepared to read very much of it. And yes, all the way through his life, he was a man in a dapper suit. Another of the Beats in the early part was Jack Kerouac, who I quoted earlier, 1922 to 1969. Jack Kerouac had served in the Merchant Marine, which very dangerous part of the shipping in the North Atlantic during the Second World War. He too was a vet. He wrote On the Road, probably the most nowadays known text from the Beat movement. It became a central text for an entire generation of people that would be coming next in the counterculture. Less known, but probably more important book ultimately is The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. He wrote it after On the Road, and it was about trying to find an Eastern understanding, basically Zen Buddhism, although the understanding of the time was a little off. The third of the most famous Beat writers was Allen Ginsberg, 1926 to 1997. 4F, not allowed into, he was drafted but not allowed into the Army for mental reasons. His most famous book, Howl, and other poems. The poem Howl becomes the central text of the Beat generation in terms of the oral presentation, and what becomes again a cliche of the Beat generation: bongos, live poetry readings, and very exciting coffee houses. Let's look a little bit at Jack Kerouac's On the Road. This is a quote from the book. As we crossed the Colorado-Utah border, I saw God in the sky in the form of huge gold sun-burning clouds above the desert that seemed to point a finger at me and say, pass here and go on. You're on the road to heaven. So there's a beatific vision out on the road. Another quote, no matter what you do, it's bound to be a waste of time in the end, so you might as well go mad, using the term mad as in crazy, insane. And this kind of was the summation of what many people were thinking after the Second World War. Some quotes from the Dharma Bums, just to take a peek at the more religious side of this experimentation. My karma was to be born in America, where nobody has any fun or believes in anything, especially freedom. Well, how do you feel about America of the 1950s, Jack Kerouac? He also wrote, wanted to get me a full pack, complete with everything necessary to sleep, shelter, eat, cook. In fact, a regular kitchen and bedroom right on my back, and go off somewhere and find perfect solitude and look into the perfect emptiness of my mind and be completely neutral from any and all ideas. Yes, that is indeed a Zen Buddhist ideal. Here he is expressing it in a very American way. He's going to buy himself a backpack and take off into the mountains. Another quote, I intended to pray too as my only activity. Pray for all living creatures. I saw it was the only decent activity left in the world. To be in some river bottom somewhere, or in a desert, or in mountains, or in some hut in Mexico, or shack in Adirondack, and rest and be kind and do nothing else. Practice what the Chinese called nirvana. Yes. So remembering the wiki definition here, the central elements of beat culture, making a spiritual quest, the exploration of American and Eastern religions, and the rejection of economic materialism. That's what a good number of people were all about after the Second World War. One final quote from Jack Kerouac's On the Road. When you start separating people from their rivers, what have you got? Bureaucracy. And I think that pretty well sums up what the beat idea was about after the Second World War. And it really sets up a countercultural movement that embracing the religious and spiritual rather than the materialistic and the gray flannel suit side of things. Of course, this did, as I mentioned, create a vast cliche kind of economy, and it's great fun to do some Googling out there and look up beatnik and just to see what you can find. You can get yourself a beatnik diploma. You confirmed that you are a hep cat and you're ready for the beatnik philosophy. And you can head out and do things such as go barefoot, it says, grow a beard, play the bongos, read Dada poetry out loud, travel across country on motor scooters, yes, and browbeat any egghead who bugs you at the bar. So there you have it, your beatnik diploma. On Thursday, we'll take another look at the beats a little bit deeper to look at some more of the spiritual quest aspect of this group of young people who had lived through the Second World War and were looking for more in life than just returning to the normality of the United States of the day. Thanks for listening, and I will see you on Thursday.